You know, this has been a good series on walking with the Lord, this idea of when we walk with God, He enables us to do things that we could normally do, to see things we wouldn't normally see. There's power in the walk with Jesus when we follow Him. And for those of you who are new to faith or thinking about faith, today we're going to tell a story of a remember when story. How many of you guys in your families have the family historian? Every time you get together, they always say, remember when? And you're like, really? They tell the story, and it's so fun. That my little brother Chris is that guy. He always remembers everything we did in junior high and high school that I've totally zoomed past until say, remember when? And I'm like, oh yeah, and we get to relive that moment again. Maybe you're that person in your family when you get together, you tell the stories of remember when. Hollywood does this for us, you know. They help us remember cultural moments that we may have been alive to see or maybe preceded us. One of my favorite all-time movies is The Right Stuff. It is a guy's guy movie about those first astronauts that went into outer space and all the stuff that they had to put their body through. These were Navy SEALs times 10. And it was so cool to watch because, you know, the original astronauts that went and orbited who was John Glenn? That was the guy. He was the one that finally went in orbit, the first man that orbited the Earth, and it was kind of cool to see the backstory on that. And of course, the other guy's guy movie that we all love that is not historical, but it's set in a historical setting called Rome. It is Gladiator, right? Maximus. Yeah, right. What was his full name? Decimus Meridius Maximus. Maximus Decimus Meridius. All right. It's a pretty fancy name, right? But when you get those remember when moments, you go, wow, like Pearl Harbor was a pretty good movie, but it was about a remember when time when Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese and the American response. The remember when movies that are out recently, the Darkest Hour, is that the one about Winston Churchill that's out recently? And there's a whole lot of remember when movies, like Spider-Man too. You know, remember when? You know, Spider-Man. It's not a real remember when, but you know, they just try to go there, and all the Marvel comics that do that. There's a new one coming out this week. Bohemian Rhapsody. Some of you may have already seen it. Freddie Mercury's kind of a biopic of the band Queen. I was a huge fan when I was in high school because that's when the music came out. But Hope, my 14-year-old, is like, I want to see that, Dad, because some of those songs have been so transcendent, right? Another one, Bites of Dust. Another one, right? We are the champions, my friend. Everybody gets their lighter out, right? How many Queen fans we have in the house? All right, yeah, okay. So I haven't seen the movie. The movie's getting pretty good reviews from the fans of movies. Now the critics, they don't like anything that the rest of us like, but so the fans love it because it's a remember when. It kind of brings out nostalgia. And today, the remember when story we're going to talk about is from John's perspective. John was the last one to write in the whole New Testament. And he wrote as the youngest of the 12 disciples, the 12 that were closest to Jesus. So he wrote last, and he wrote about the stories, and at the end of his little book that we call the Book of John, it's really a tractate, it's really small. He said, if all the stories that I could tell you about Jesus were to be written, of all the great things he had done, the world could not contain all the books. So apparently, in the life of Jesus, we have these remember when stories that stand out, that help us see 2,000 years later what it would have been like to be in the presence of God in the flesh. And so we have our story today because we need stories like today to help us. Right now we have 2008, I was looking on my phone. 2008 is when the App Store first launched. And some of the original apps on the first App Store, there were 500 and some apps available for the iPhone, was I wrote it down here in my notes here. I'm not thinking very well. Yelp, Facebook, those were some of the originals on the original apps. But today, there's an app for nearly everything. Remember when Angry Birds came out? Like all you could do was play Angry Birds. How does it know, you know? Like when your little finger, I remember the first time I touched an iPhone, my big fat fingers and thumbs, they touched like 4 different letters at the same time. It still takes me about 10 minutes to type out a 10-word text. That's just me. But some of y'all just fly around like you don't even look. You're like this, you're texting like this. Well, 10 years ago, the apps that came out, and then now there's an app for just about everything, right? There's an app for exercise and fitness. There's food apps, there's sports apps. There's Starbucks app. We got to have that, right? And then there's all the social media apps that where you can keep up with your pseudo friends. And then you can even find out where famous people ate and watch them chew things. And where they're getting their nails done. And what they think about a certain thing, like that's even important. But it's almost like you're in their life. Right? There's an app for just about everything, right? Anything that you can come across, if you need directions across town, there's an app for that. If you need to put your face on a different hairstyle, there's an app for that. If you want to see what it would look like if you were completely bald, there's an app for that. But sometimes in life, there are things that you run into there's no solution for. There's no app. There's no self-help book. Sometimes Jesus is the only solution. And so as people of faith, we've come together, and when we sing that song, The King of My Heart, You're Never Gonna Let Me Down, that is from a place of experience with the risen Christ, who over time has revealed himself as the only solution to some of the biggest problems we face. Author Dan Brown, he wrote the Da Vinci Code, and I was reading an article this morning that he spoke on, and he said, humanity no longer needs God, but they may need help, the help of artificial intelligence, to develop a new collective consciousness that fulfills the role of religion. That's Dan's take on what we need. We just need more artificial intelligence to connect our brains somehow, and that way we're going to feel better about life. And Dan is well-meaning. I think he really believes what he says here, but you know what? He hasn't met Jesus yet. Because when you meet Jesus, you understand there are some things that only Jesus can fix. And so in John chapter 5, I want you to get out your notes and follow along with me. This greatest remember when story, when Jesus walked by a certain place and changed the life of one man. Now, as you look at this man, I want you to think of yourself in a similar position sometimes. It says sometime later, that means after the previous chapter, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now, Jerusalem is on top of the hill. That's why it says they went up, because physically you would have to climb a hill for one of the Jewish festivals that all males were required to attend. So Jesus was obeying the law. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Now when I say pool, don't think swimming pool, chlorinated, clean. Think mud hole, okay? Maybe with a spring attached to it, but not with a lot of moving water except for certain times, all right? It says here in verse 3, a number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. Now, if you'll notice in your notes, it skips from verse 4 to verse 5, and there's no content there. Let me explain to you what happened. In some of the more recent manuscripts that we translate from Greek to English, there is a story in verse 4 of why these people were laying around this fancy pool. The reason the lame and the blind and the paralyzed were there was because there was a legend that ever so often an angel would stir the pool. It would just become a jacuzzi. And what we would know as thermal impact, it was just something that underground was going on, and from a scientific mindset, we could understand that this pool was bubbling because there was some seismic activity going on. These ancient people thought it had to be a result of some supernatural force. And if you could just get in right after the bubbles happened, then you would, in fact, be healed. Now, we don't have a lot of records about if that actually occurred. There's always a placebo effect to think, they've documented how we can take a pill, and if we think it is the right medicine, that fake pill called a placebo can actually cure us. There's some placebo effect, I think, happening with the group think that if the bubbles happened, then we could be healed. Now, they omit it from this manuscript. It's not in this Bible version because the oldest manuscripts don't have this story in it. So it was like the newer authors were looking back and trying to explain why they were lying around. Somebody had heard the legend and inserted that in some of the newer manuscripts. Now, when I say newer manuscripts, I'm talking 200 and 300 AD. These are not new by our standards. So that's why that verse isn't in there, but that's pretty much why they were lying there. These people had this idea that there was a healing in this pool, kind of like essential oils, right? Everybody's got a friend that swears by essential oils. Now, they've been around, and you might be one of them. I'm not taking shots. They may have worked great for you, but they don't do everything that everybody claims. I mean, essential oils, it fixed my cell phone, really did. No, yeah. Sometimes people go that far about it. That's just one thing, okay? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be mean at all. If you sell it, keep selling it. It does everything you says it does. All right. Everything you think it does, all right. So, verse 5. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years, all right? When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Or, "Do you want to get well?" Or, "Do you really want to get well?" It's one of those three. Okay, so I said before, we're the man on the mat in some way in our life. There are some areas where we get stuck. It can be attitude issues. It could be our moods that just tend to dip and stay sad all the time. That's a mat that you live with. Sometimes you try to medicate it. Sometimes you try to numb the pain, but it's still the mat you find yourself. That's just the way I am, Pastor. I'm just sad all the time, or I'm just so depressed that I can't get out of bed. And so that would be a mat for you. Some of you, it's the relational issues that plague your home. Pastor, our home, all we know is conflict. And so you can just put it down, like when we get home today or when we get in the car and we go home, we're going to begin to fight. If we just shut up and shut down, that's the only way we keep conflict from happening in our home. That's just the mat we live on. Some of you, you're like, "Oh, the mat I live on, it's way different than that." It is totally physical, and you've got some physical problems that maybe doctors have diagnosed, and you're here, you're hoping for hope, and you're listening, but man, you've been doing it that way so long. And what I know that in family life and in our mental state, what happens is the longer the suffering, the longer the hardship, the longer the brokenness, the easier it is to stay broken. I just can't get a good job, so I'm just going to give up. Let other people take care of me. I just can't make it. And there are a lot of excuses that all of us, everybody in this room, use to excuse part of the way that we are. And Jesus comes to you and to me and says, "Do you want to get well? Do you really want to walk? Do you really want to walk with Jesus, or are you going to hide right there on your mat? Are you going to stay put while the world passes by, or are you open? Are you open to the idea that when you leave this room today, that you could be 100% engaged in your faith with Jesus Christ? You could fully follow him, even with the scars, even with the wounds of persons that spoke evil over you. Even with all of those things, you can just let it go and leave it at the altar today and say, "Jesus, you and I are going to walk this thing out together. I want to be healed. I'm tired of being broken. I'm tired of my family being broken. I'm going to stake my claim in the blood of Jesus Christ today and believe that he can help me. Do you want to be healed? Do you want to be well? Do you want to? Want to is the first step, because acceptance of brokenness for a Christian is not the way to live. If something is broken, you continually bring it to Jesus and say, Jesus, it's broken, it's not fixed yet. I'm walking in the fixing that you are now providing, but I'm also believing for the fixing that you're fixing to do. Right? That's what we do as Christian people. We know that it's not always an overnight, instantaneous change in our life. So in verse 7, look at this. The invalid said, after prolonged illness, and I got a feel for this guy. Ancient culture, no nurses available. This is a stinky, dirty place, okay? Just imagine, if you will, the smell. And really, just before I say anything about him, notice where Jesus was when the party was going on. Jesus didn't go to the party, he went to the infirmary. And he provides for us a model that no matter how great things are, if we do make America great again, there are always going to be people that are being missed, people that are falling through the cracks, to which we as Christian people say, I know the party is over there, jobs are going great, incomes are on the rise, but there is a gap between rich and poor that we need to address as Christian people, not as a political statement, but as a way of life. And that's why I'm so proud of Brad in his willingness to step into the gap for our Special Olympics team. Because there was a need. And he said, I'll do it. And folks, the healing that comes through your saying yes to go to the people that everybody else is looking around, because I guarantee you this, most upstanding people in Jerusalem knew where the pools were of Bethesda. They knew, and they traveled right around them. I don't want to look at that. That's some suffering over there. But Jesus engaged this suffering one. Verse 7 again, he says, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. In other words, when the miracle is going to happen, I can't get in. When I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Now, that seems like a valid excuse for someone who can't walk, doesn't it? I can't get in. But you would think in 38 years, he could round up at least a little support from the buddies that were around the pool with him, like the blind guy and the deaf guy. Hey, can you guys just, when the water's, I've been here 37 years. I'd rather not go 38. Can you just push me in when the water's stirred? Let me go. It's my turn. I mean, if four-way stop signs, we always give everybody else a turn. Like, it's my turn, okay? Everybody, if it's really working, it's my turn. But that wasn't the issue. That was his excuse. The issue was he had learned a broken way of life. He was comfortable letting others do for him rather than trying to step into the future that God had for him, which was off the mat. He didn't want off the mat. I've been here 38 years. I can't get in. It's too late for me. And I've talked to a lot of people that think, Pastor, I would love to serve God, but I would love to serve somewhere, but, and there's always the big but, right? Always the big but in the room. And that's what he's saying here, but. And Jesus went around his big butt and said, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Now, I don't know if he yelled it. He might have. I just think he spoke to the guy, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. Something that was impossible for him to do before the word of Jesus was spoken over him. But soon as the words of Jesus came out of his mouth, look at this, at once the man was cured, he picked up his mat and he walked. What a remember when story. Do you remember when that guy that had been there 38 years, when Jesus walked up to him and he said to him, pick up your mat and walk, and the guy got up? Yeah, I remember. It was so cool. He was like looking around going, how is this happening? It's working. And we've been telling that story for 2,000 years because the need has never gone away. Many of you came today on Time Change Sunday, hoping for some hope, but still stuck on a mat. And when I put this talk together, I felt like the Lord say, don't put much together. Just listen to me in the moment. So I'm up here flying blind a little bit. I'm very prepared, but I'm trusting that what I'm saying to you is getting through in a way that if I prepared too much, it might miss you. What mat are you laying on? See, Jesus addresses the problem of brokenness with his power because there's no app to fix what ails you. There's no self-help book. There's some solutions that Jesus is the only one to answer. Well, what happens? Keep on going in verse 9. There's some problems that only Jesus can fix, and the day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, "It's the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "Well, the man who made me well said, 'Pick up your mat and walk.' So they asked, 'Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?' The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said, 'See, you're well again. Stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you.' The man went away and told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, Lord have mercy, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him." Again, do you see the problem with the people? There was a problem with the man on the mat, but there was a problem with the religious people, of which we are those today. We're religious people. We're observers. We came on a Sunday to worship God. But sometimes the lame among us, the people that have lost something who are now living out this new life, it's sometimes, oh man, Pastor, you don't know that family. I've lived in Lakeland all my life, and this is an up and down thing. They'll get over it, and they'll go back to who they are. They're just worthless. There's no change. I don't believe it. I'll believe it when I see it. And even when they see it, they don't believe it. You've been around people like that? And here's what we don't do enough of, and a pastor friend pointed this out to us at our staff retreat this week. In the church, we have too many secrets. There's too many secrets. And he said, it's not a negative thing. He said, there's too many great stories of God where people have gotten up off the mat and they have not been told. And so sometimes we cling to religion rather than the transformational stories that Jesus has done in our body because we're not connected enough to know them, or we haven't spoken them out of our mouth. And here's what I know that will put an end to religion. It's when people are being transformed and they tell their stories. Because this story of the mat guy, it irked the Jewish leaders because it didn't happen the way they thought it should happen, because there was a law against breaking the Sabbath and working on the Sabbath, and you couldn't carry your mat. There was a law. There's a law against that. They overlooked the miracle because it didn't fit into their box. And we can do that sometimes in religious circles. And one of the things that I know God would love for us to do is just begin to tell our stories. Because our stories have transforming power. Just like the story of the person that got notified of the $17,000 blessing after they heard from God on a Tuesday. I know I should tithe. And so they got online and they tithed. And so what happened after that? The blessing followed. Now you say, well, that check was in the works. I'm not going to give God the credit for that. Here's what happened. The check was in the works, but God wanted to get the glory. So that God would get the glory, he prompted his servant to give. And his servant did give. And then when she found out that the blessings of God were on the other end of that, it was just like God to just make sure that we know every good and perfect gift comes from the Father above. Amen? Now, see, you can explain away the blessings of God all you want, but I'm telling you, when you tell the stories that God has done for you, Janice Lafferty, she's over 90 years old. She attends our 8:30 service, has been here a long time. Janice is one of the coolest ladies you'll ever meet. 2 weeks ago, she got me down front, and she said, Pastor, you talked about how we need to go to people that have something against us. And I was searching my mind thinking, oh, Lord, who is it? Who is it that I need to go to? And she said, it took me a while, but I thought about my neighbor. I haven't talked to him in 2 years. I don't know why. We used to be friends, but I must have done something. So I thought to myself, I'm going to go over to his house and knock on his door. So she went over to his house and knocked on his door. He wasn't home. Did it twice and said, okay, God, I've done my part. He's not home. And God says, you haven't done your part yet. You need to go another time. So she goes on the third time. Knocks on the door. He finally comes to the door and sees her. His face drops. He's not happy with Janice. She doesn't know why. And she says to the neighbor, I know we used to have a relationship and a friendship, and I'm not sure what has happened, but I want you to know I'm sorry for anything I may have done that offended you or hurt you. Will you forgive me? And she said the guy looked down and was like, well, yeah, I guess so. She never did know what it was. But Janice didn't want to leave it there. She said, now what you need to know is I think we need to be friends. We're brothers and sisters in Christ. He's a Christian. And I would like for our friendship to go back to where it was a few years ago, if that would be okay with you. Well, okay. Yeah, we'll do that. They kept going. This conversation was nowhere close to being over with Janice. That's one of the things you got to know about her. She's like a pit bull on a pork chop. She had a mission. And by the end of the conversation, the guy's countenance had changed. And he said, hey, you want to run around the neighborhood in my golf cart? She said, sure. So they run around the neighborhood in his golf cart, and they run into a neighbor that Janice didn't know. And here's what the man said. Hey, I want to introduce you to my friend, Janice. And she's telling me this as a 91 or so year old, over 70-year-old sister in Christ. And when she told her story, I'm like, yes, it works. The map that she was on that she didn't know that she was on, she had a neighbor that had something against her. It wasn't even something that she had done intentionally, but somebody's feelings were hurt. So she got up out of her comfort zone and left and knocked on a door and made something right. And when she did her part, Jesus did his part, restored the relationship to better than it was before. Now, some of you are on the mat of offense. Oh, they've offended me, Pastor, you don't know, right? And you're stuck there and you can't forgive them. And I had a friend just say this week, God, I can't forgive them, but will you give me the strength to move to the next day, to give me the strength to forgive them in the meantime? Like, help me to walk this thing out. Do you want to be well? Do you want to be healed today? Do you want to be made whole? Does your marriage need more than a makeover? Does it need the paddles that only Jesus can give? Because right now, you're sitting next to your biggest enemy, not your best friend. There are some problems that only Jesus can solve. He's the only solution. Not rules, not religion, not more 10 steps, 5 steps to wholeness. All of these talks that I give, they're based in this one reality, that when Jesus meets a problem, the problem goes down. If you allow him to take care of whatever it is in your life that needs to go. What mat do you find yourself on? Do you want to be well? Or are you going to hide behind your excuses all your life? If you'll allow Jesus to change you today, and if you'll allow him to get the words out of your mouth to somebody else when you leave this place today, he will set this city on fire through the people who've been changed by his love. Will you stand with me and bow your heads? I'm going to invite our musicians to come forward. And today is a time where I want you to respond physically if you feel the prompting of the Holy Spirit to rise up, take up your mat, and walk. And I want you to walk down here and kneel, because I'm going to pray for you in just a moment and let the power of God deliver you, all right? And if somebody comes down that you know, would you just come and slip in beside them or put your hand on their shoulder because you want to engage with them in their weakness so that they can get up and walk? We're not here to point fingers at anybody. In fact, if somebody sees you walking out of your seat, they're not going to think less of you. They're going to think, wow, how strong you are. In a public setting like this, to declare your need for Jesus is a pretty cool thing. My heart has kind of broken for the guys of our church sometimes. Over the years, I would just love for the guys of our church to put down their manhood for a minute and just say, I need Jesus, and I don't care who knows, and I need to respond today. So whatever mat you're on, if you want to get off of it and walk, you want Jesus' power, would you come and respond to this message, all right?